So I'm sitting in my seat, and I had texted Michael Kaskey-Blomain saying, like, hey, man, you here?
Yeah.
He's like, I'm parking. So I had a seat for him, and I was sitting there watching, and they had the bell ringer before the game.
Yeah, who was the bell ringer last night?
The RZA.
Who?
Don't say who.
I didn't hear you.
The RZA.
The RZA?
Yeah.
No idea who that is.
MKB, please help this young man. He doesn't know the RZA.
What the heck's the RZA?
He has to brush up on his 90s hip-hop, apparently.
The Wu-Tang, man.
Oh, Wu-Tang. Yeah, I know Wu-Tang. I don't know him personally, individually. Told you, bro. I can't like list people or bands, artists, and give you their name or song names. I'm the worst.
I said, MKB, you missed the RZA. He said, no, I caught him. Where were you sneaking? Like, oh, you were down in the media room.
Yeah, well, as soon as they said it was RZA, I mean, I had to make sure I had my eyes on the court. So
that got more attention. That had more attention than anything yesterday.
Seriously. It was up there. It was up there.
MKB, tell me that crowd wasn't lit when the RZA got announced as the bell ringer.
I think the only time they were louder was during that spin when they were pissed off at the refs for that call on Embiid where he got teed up. That was probably the loudest.
So after the RZA rang the bell and the game started, the Sixers looked like crap to begin that game. And then really, Brett Brown took a timeout and then came out of that timeout, and they went on a run, man, and never really looked back. It was probably one of their best defensive efforts in the second half. Now, Brett said in the postgame they didn't change their scheme. They just, play better. And this is a lot of conversation about people get mad at Brett that he doesn't do this and he doesn't do that. I think yesterday's game was a real good example of, when this team plays and executes the way they're supposed to, they were clearly better than that Indiana team.
Yeah, Mike, that's a good point. I thought that was a really funny answer from Brett, too. It's like, one of the most basic things, what did you do differently in the second half? He was, basically nothing. We just played better, which is, it was true. They have, the scheme in place. What they're going to do is in place. And a lot of times, which is just, you and I were talking about it yesterday. It's a matter of course in the NBA. There's some times where the team just like don't come out with it. And that's how it was in that first half yesterday. I think the fans obviously expected them to come out with more energy considering, the importance of the game being with the Pacers for the third seed. But they came out sluggish. And then, at halftime, whatever Brett said to the team, and they came out in the second half and just executed better. It was really like they looked like two different teams. They allowed 34 points in the second quarter and then 30 points total in the second half. The defense really stepped up the assignments and like the switches looked smoother. So, it's really like an example, like you said, of how far execution goes. There's obviously adjustments in game planning, but sometimes it is really just a matter of, getting the players to play harder and together at the same time.
I could be overanalyzing this, MKB, which is something I do from time to time. But I feel like that's an answer coming from Brett, like to put out the fire of all of this nonsense and over criticism and overreaction that he's getting. Last year, Brett would not answer a question like that. 4 or 5 months ago, Brett would not answer a question like that. He is feeling this pressure. So after a win, when they ask him what you do differently, because after a loss, they come at him pretty hard. He's nothing. I didn't do anything. Like, come on. Like last year, he would say, well, you know what? I told Joel to
you watch the game.
I don't think he's lying. Like, there's truth to it. He didn't do anything crazy, but that's not an answer that he would say. He feels the pressure is my point.
I mean, he definitely feels the pressure, and I think some of it's outside pressure. I don't think there's organizational pressure necessarily. But I think, a lot of people, there's a lot of noise when he doesn't do things well that I'm sure he hears. I don't think he hears a whole lot of noise when he does things well, like, beat the Pacers by 20 in the second half and locks up the 3 seed. So I think maybe it's like you might be right in the point that it's, last year he might have found something. He might have said Joel woke up a little bit more and was more assertive in the post and was better at getting to the line, and that, really made a difference. He might have found something like that to say. I think at this point, I don't know if it's, a matter of comfort or where he is or just the situation or his focus. Mike was pointing out yesterday that he looks just like a weathered man at this point in the season right now with so much going on and so much up in the air. But I think at that point he just didn't, find it necessary to really, I guess, overanalyze. I think if he had really made an adjustment, in the halftime in terms of the game plan and what he was doing, I think he would have pointed it out. But since it wasn't a big adjustment, I think he just felt it, not necessary, I guess, to get into it.
Yeah, and one thing that I want to praise him for, that 8-game stretch without Embiid after the All-Star break, the reaction and the criticism has been as high as it's ever been, if not in quite a long time. And to come out of that 4-4, and yesterday, Tobias Harris on record, a must-win. It's not a must-win, but when you say that, it's a very big game. You're getting Embiid back. You're at home, prime time. You're looking up at the team you're playing, 1 game back. A win breaks the tiebreaker. We all know how important it was. Now, I think that's a statement win in a sense that he's able to kind of hold that locker room together, he being Brett Brown. He got through that rough patch at 500. Joel comes back, and they essentially dominate the Pacers in that second half to get a win. I mean, what are your thoughts on where this team is at collectively as a group as we get down the stretch?
I think collectively at this point, they're still really trying to just gel, and I think they pretty much all kind of point to that when you ask them where they think they are. I think they're aware of the talent that they have on the team, and they're aware of the game plan. I think they all know of, what they're trying to do, what Brett wants them to do on the court and how he wants them to play. I think it's just so much a matter of, they're not all comfortable yet, and it's just a matter of them continuing to do that. Brett said that yesterday. I said it a little more profoundly than I did. I think he, used one of his plane analogies. It's about landing the plane smoothly and getting the team into the postseason with all the cylinders clicking or something like that. But that's really where it is.
I think he took that from Mark Zumoff.
Yeah, he probably did. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really a matter of them. He also mentioned if for him going forward the rest of this season, it's obviously about finding the right mixes of, rotations and subs. So I think the next month going into the playoffs and where they are right now is that they know they're a talented team. I think any given night they think that they truly think that they could compete with any team in the league, including the Warriors. Obviously you're supposed to think that, but I think that, those guys, especially when Joel's in there playing like he did in the second half yesterday, they really, believe that from Brett down through the players. So it's just a matter of finding that consistency. And I think finding that consistency stems from, continuing to develop this chemistry. And I think that's where, it's an issue. The only thing is you don't know, is it going to be able to be developed by playoff time? Is the team going to click? Those are still questions, but where they are is in the midst of finding out the answers to those questions, I guess.
Yeah, and I know Brett will say it, but I don't think I don't think the detractors want to hear it from Brett.
The haters?
However, the players have kind of backed him on this, that many of them, I don't want to say are confused, but certainly are not, I don't want to say certain of their roles, but are still finding their roles and finding their ways and finding the terminology. And you see it a lot. The first half, I thought their defense was awful yesterday during the game, and a lot of that is just lack of communication and really not knowing, the terminology in the system.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely part of it, Mike. I think that, there are guys that most of them haven't played together for more than, 15, 20 games. And it's not only learning the new system, from what Brett and Billy Lang and the rest of the guys want, but also, learning to play with all new teammates. And I was talking with Josh on the air over the weekend and about how much, especially defense of a team is, it stems from chemistry, and guys, the popular expression is defenders are on a string, meaning they all communicate and are moving basically as one unit. And to get to that point, which is where you see some of the best defenses in the league, you need to have, that familiarity and the chemistry and the communication down. And I think that's still a work in progress for the Sixers. And the challenge and some of that outside pressure that we were just talking about that Brett feels is knowing that he has all this talent, and now it's easy to, he never had this talent before, so that was kind of a built-in, excuse, for lack of a better word, that he had with the roster. Now it's kind of, all right, he has all this talent and the pressure that is on for him to, fit the pieces together. And for some people, I think it's kind of easy to forget that it's, there is still things that need to be ironed out chemistry-wise. You can't just get, 4 All-Stars, 3 All-Stars and throw them together and say, all right, this team's going to, go win a championship.
Yeah, taking that chemistry, topic and focusing it in on one player. Besides Brett Brown, he's been getting the majority of the focus, fair or unfair. Jimmy Butler, there's been a lot of people people meaning trolls on Twitter, overreacting to his passiveness in the game. I mean, the other night he had, one shot in the first half. He doesn't seem like, to some, that he's fully engaged at times. I have full trust and faith in Jimmy Butler. I think come playoff time, he's going to win this team many playoff games and arguably many playoff series. The game shifts, as you know, MKB, a lot come playoff time, and I think that just suits Jimmy Butler, a veteran who's great in ISO and in half-court basketball. But what's your take on Jimmy? Do you see anything that's, for lack of a better term, concerning to you with how he's been approaching the games in the half-court offense?
That's a great question. And no, I don't see anything concerning about his approach. He was kind of put in, like a tough situation coming here because, if he came in here and was a high volume, high usage offensive player that was taking 20-some shots a game and was taking looks away from Ben, taking some of the threes away from JJ, taking the ball out of Joel's hands in the post, things like that, you'd hear people complaining. It's, on the other scale, he's kind of, I think, doing his best to kind of just assimilate and not step on toes, try to facilitate, do things on the defensive end where, and that kind of gets taken to, by some as him not being assertive. But I think you see, especially in like the crunch time of a lot of these games where he gets the ball in his hands, he's able to draw, his ability to get to the line, I think is something that doesn't get talked about a ton, but that's been really valuable. He's like an 81, 82, I think, percent shooter from the line, and he gets there, pretty much at will when he wants to, when he just decides he wants to get into the lane, which is something like you were just saying that, once the playoffs come time and the game slows down, that fits his style very well. And I think, he was brought here largely due based off what happened in the playoffs last year against the Celtics, where the Sixers, they didn't really have a guy on the perimeter. Obviously, Joel's a go-to guy, but a post player, it's harder to, be that go-to guy because you have to rely on a guard or a wing player to get you the ball a lot of the times, where a perimeter guy can, get a steal, get a defensive rebound, push the ball like Jimmy can, and create offense on his own, which I think was a big reason that the team brought him in here was, of course, for the regular season, but the regular season was more for him to get comfortable with this, Joel and Ben and now Tobias for the postseason. So I don't have any concerns with his approach whatsoever. I mean, I do have some concerns about the team potentially signing him moving forward to a max deal, but those concerns are more based on things that are, his age, injury issues, things more so like that, rather than anything that he's done specifically since he's been here with the team.
Yeah, Michael Kaskey-Blomain covers the 76ers at The Real Mike KB. Let me get your take on Redick's role. I've heard a lot of people recently reaching out saying he's got to come off the bench. And now I think at this stage of the season it's kind of hard to make a move like that. But what's your take on where Redick is? There's a lot of people, he was hurt by Embiid being out. And he shot the ball. He had a couple of threes yesterday, but he still didn't have some breakout game. So as this season has kind of materialized, what do you think of JJ?
Yeah, Mike. Well, I mean, he's obviously kind of marred in a shooting slump right now, and when he's not shooting the ball well, it really magnifies his, the other deficiencies in his game because it's harder to justify, giving him the starters minutes that he's been getting over the past 2 years. When he's giving you, 18 points, 5 threes a game, it's one thing that he's given up a lot on the other end and isn't really bringing up much else to the floor offensively. But when he's not knocking those shots down, it's really easy to see, that he's sort of a liability, and that has some people, like you said, questioning his role, if he should be playing less, if he should be coming off the bench. I do agree that I think it's too late in this season. Well, for a couple, for a couple reasons, it's too late, and also for lack of better options. If you bring JJ to the bench, at this point, who are you going to put in? But I think I do have some questions about what he's going to be able to do in the playoffs. You see teams like the Celtics or other well-coached teams like that really kind of going out of their way to hunt him defensively, to go, get switches on him and then isolate on him at either the post or on the wing, where he's really overmatched in both situations. So I think that's going to be something tough for Brett to kind of balance, because obviously they want him as a weapon out on the floor and a release valve for Joel and Ben. even when he's not, knocking down the shots like he's, does normally, like recently, he's still a threat out there, and he's still a guy that the defense, maybe they're not locking to him as tight as they used to. They still, certainly can't leave him alone and have to respect what he does. So that's important in and of itself. But I think that's on top of all the other things Brett has to figure out, how he's going to use him moving forward when, some of these teams are really going at him defensively is going to be, a question, that I think is going to not necessarily dictate the team's success, but certainly play a big part in how well they do in the postseason.
Yeah, I completely agree, MKB. Another area of focus for me, at least, is the big man position. So Embiid just missed a bunch of games. Boban just missed a bunch of games. And then you have kind of an island of misfit toys. Jonah Bolden at times looks like he's great and can handle a legitimate backup role for this team or any NBA team. And other times you can tell he's just not ready and experienced. And then Amir is kind of Amir. You love him sometimes, you hate him sometimes as well, depending on who you are. So once the playoffs come, I'm just curious to see how many minutes does Embiid get? How much better is his cardio going
48.
to be? Right, he should get 48, but can he handle the, extended minutes? And then Boban, I know it depends on matchups, but how many minutes is he going to get? And how are they going to use those big men that they have on the roster?
By the way, real quick, before Michael answers that, Deshaun Jackson has been traded to the Eagles. So go ahead, Michael.
Well, welcome back, Deshaun.
Yeah.
No, but that's a great point. I think that's, again, not to just throw everything else on Brett, but I don't think the rotation for the playoffs in terms of the front court, it's ever going to be able to be fully set because it's going to be, it's not only Boban, I think that's going to be, a matchup type situation. It's the same with Amir and Jonah. I think there would be, certain teams or matchups where Jonah's speed or, ability to get up and down the floor will be beneficial, where other times, Amir's whatever it is you want to say Amir brings to the floor at this point could be useful, I guess, in certain situations. But it's really interesting for the Sixers because each big guy is, they don't have one well-rounded backup for Joel. It's like you said, island of mismatch or misfit toys. I thought that was pretty fitting because it is, they all have positives they bring to the table, but they also all have pretty glaring negatives that are hard to ignore. If you were able to combine Boban and, Amir's intelligence and IQ with Boban's size and Jonah's shooting and athleticism, that would be a hell of a backup. But since you can't do that, it's something else that Brett's going to really have to juggle, and I think it's going to be, largely matchup dependent.
You wrote about today about the 3 seed. That's an obvious statement that 3 is better than 4 or certainly 5, but how much more important is it in terms of, the path? Because there's 5 teams that really, now we saw Indiana yesterday, and if you read the Indiana papers, they're having the same discussion out there that they really haven't beaten the Eastern Conference elite team. So I guess yesterday was the first clue of them being a little bit lesser than the other 4. But you're going to have 5 teams that, are going to be in that mix. So being the 3.
Raptors, Celtics, and Pacers, if you end up in that 4 or 5 spot, you potentially have to go 3 consecutive series against one of those teams all the way to get, through to the conference, to the NBA Finals. Whereas if you were really able to secure that 3 seed, not that, the Sixers are in no position to overlook any of these teams, but you'd be able to think that if it's a matchup with the Detroit Pistons, who they fared well against, or a team like the upstart Brooklyn Nets in the first round, that's, obviously way more favorable of a matchup to kind of get warmed up into that and then let, those other teams fight it out with each other in the first round. There would be a chance, of an upset there. Maybe the Pacers taking somebody out. You never know. So it just certainly makes it that much easier for the Sixers moving forward. And obviously, Sixers have enjoyed one of the best home court advantages in the league over the past couple of seasons. So 3, at least guarantees them that home court advantage in that first round and puts them in, a decent position if there were to be an upset in that first round to have, home court in the second round too. And obviously the more games at the center, the better for the team. So it is an obvious statement, but I think for the Sixers specifically, who also would probably be best suited to avoid the Celtics in that first round, just based off matchups, would I think they would really want to find themselves. And it's no secret, Mike Joel was talking about that to us yesterday, that he really felt that it was important to play in that game yesterday specifically because of the implications for the standings and how he wanted to be out there to help put his team in good position moving forward, even if it meant that, even if he came back and then missed a couple more games, as long as he was able to play in that game. So I think it's no secret that, they want that 3 seed. And I think it would just be, a better kind of path for them to move into, the ideal matchups for them to potentially get to the finals, or at least the conference finals.
Do you feel like Toronto's flown under the radar here down the stretch? Because I have. I feel like the focus, even on a national level, has been Boston struggles, Sixers with their new toys, and Toronto has kind of just been lingering around doing what they need to do for the most part. How much of a matchup problem could they be? Or is that a matchup that you would maybe prefer the Sixers having over the Bucks or the Celtics?
No, thank you.
I know how you feel.
No, I do agree that I think they've definitely flown under the radar a little bit because the storyline, although obviously adding Kawhi over the offseason was a big news. Now that the Celtics struggles, like you said, where something's got a lot of attention, the Sixers making all these moves has got a lot of attention. So, and then the Bucks have been like, the kind of the surprise team of the league that a lot of people are talking about. But the Raptors have just been steady, consistently all season. I certainly wouldn't want to face them, but if it comes to straight matchups, I think, I'm not trying to say the Sixers would necessarily beat them, but I do think matchup-wise, especially since they had the addition of Gasol in the center spot, I think like if you're looking at a matchup-wise on paper, at least the Sixers in a series, we haven't got to play the Raptors as much with this new full squad with Tobias and the team like that. I think the Sixers could fare decently against them. Obviously, the Raptors defense is one of the best in the league, so the team would have to knock down some shots. But I think that they're definitely a team that's flying under the radar. But at some point, the Sixers are going to, have to play one of these teams, whether it's Milwaukee, Boston, or, Toronto. I think Milwaukee, they would probably be okay with playing. But, if it's the Celtics or the Raptors, I think it's a coin flip depending on who you ask. It's a tough matchup both ways, but I think they would fare, decently against Toronto in a series, especially when you're depending so much more on your starters and just a couple bench guys, where as opposed to the regular season where you go deeper into the bench.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain covers the 76ers. They play the Cavs tomorrow night. They have currently the 3 seed by virtue of tiebreaker over Indiana. I'll leave you with this one, Michael. There's a lot of people who have this, the Sixers haven't been able to beat any of the top teams, which I would be frustrated by if they hadn't changed their roster so much. Like, I don't know what losing to the Boston Celtics or the Toronto Raptors with Robert Covington and Dario Saric, how much impact that has on this current team, because next game they're not going to be able to have Robert Covington and Dario Saric out there, nor Landry Shamet or any other guy that can, Mike Muscala or Wilson Chandler. Those guys aren't a part of this team anymore, so I don't know why those games bother people so much. But how much impact do those previous games have moving forward to you?
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike, and it's kind of what I was saying just like a minute ago in terms of I think they, on paper, this new team, they haven't played the Raptors or these teams yet, but I think they match up differently, and it's basically pointless to compare, not pointless, obviously, because it's the same coach, but it's, these matchups with different teams that, when the rosters are different, it's a totally different game. And I think that's one thing that's kind of made it hard to judge the Sixers this season a little bit because, as we've joked, they've had basically, 3 different iterations of this team throughout the season. Each one's been a bit different in terms of the rotations, obviously the starters, it's big changes. So it's really hard to measure as opposed to a team like Boston, who's been basically has the same lineup since opening night to right now. You can kind of judge them based off how they played against these other teams. Whereas, like you said, the Sixers playing with Covington and Rocco and those guys against the Raptors team didn't match up as well, potentially, as a team that has Tobias and Jimmy Butler does. So that's one thing about this Sixers situation that makes it kind of a crapshoot going into the playoffs, too, because you feel like, man, if you get the wrong matchup again with this team, maybe they get out early, but at the same time, if they click and, with this newer lineup, they could potentially go to the finals. So I think it's, at least for me, I don't look at this point, look too much into those previous matchups. I just look at how the team's playing now against, they played a pretty good Pacers team yesterday. Mike, they got to play the Bucks next Sunday during the day. I think those are the games where you can kind of glean, a little something out of.
At the Real Mike KB, follow him on Twitter for the stretch run, the 76ers, and you can listen to him right here on 97.3 ESPN. MKB, take care, pal.
Thanks, guys. Good talking to you.